During the Cavs Media Day Monday, LeBron was asked by reporters if he will stand for the national anthem. Here's King James.
I think you guys know when I'm passionate about something, I speak upon it. Me standing for the national anthem is something I will do. That's who I am. That's what I believe in. But that doesn't mean I don't respect and don't agree with what Colin Kaepernick is doing. You have the right to voice your opinion, stand for your opinion, and he's doing it in the most peaceful way I've ever seen someone do something. You see these videos that continue to come out. It's a scary situation that if my son calls me and said he's been pulled over, that I'm not that confident that things are going to go well and my son is going to return home. And my son just started the 6th grade.
So LeBron there, Stephen A., scared for his son's life. Powerful words. How will this anthem stance impact other players in the NBA?
I think the fact that LeBron James is taking the stand not to stand, I think that's going to influence a vast majority of the players within the National Basketball Association. LeBron James is an incredibly powerful athlete. He is somebody, whether they want to admit it or not, he's a model that they try to emulate and follow at every turn. I won't mention names, but there are players, numerous players, that try to dress like him, that try to act like him, that become more business savvy because of him, etc. He is a leader in that regard. He is somebody that they aspire to emulate moving forward. Now, having said all of that, I got a couple of things that I would like to say about this. Number one, I applaud LeBron's position on this. It's the same position that I said that I would take. I would not have done it, but I applaud Colin Kaepernick's right to do it. And certainly I don't think he should be denigrated in any way for doing what he has elected to do, nor those like Brandon Marshall, Eric Reed, and others who have elected to follow. And I applaud LeBron James for taking that stance. I'd also like to point out that I think it's important to recognize the fact that when he brought up his son and how his son is 12 years of age and he's just 4 years removed from driving a car, and if he ends up getting pulled over by a cop, that's something that he has to fear as it pertains to whether or not his child is going to end up coming home safe and sound. But then he went on to talk about all lives matter, et cetera, et cetera. And initially, I was going to say, wait a minute. I was going to hearken back to what I alluded to Cam. Say something or don't say nothing at all. I was going to go the route of pointing out how we all recognize that all lives matter, but because folks from the black community have been disenfranchised for so long and have had to endure so many things that we have had to endure, it's important that when you're talking about your son, even though you are up there and everybody knows your son is black, it's important to mention that word. Because the fact of the matter is, even though folks are getting killed in neighborhoods, whether it's the Latino community or whether it's the white community as well, the fact of the matter is when we're talking about brutality on the part of some police officers, and we're talking about lives being lost, and we're talking about unarmed individuals that are being victimized, primarily we're talking about black people. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. And I was going to say, it's interesting because we see folks taking stances that everybody could agree upon, which is what Max alluded to weeks ago, where you say something and there's no disagreeable portion to address. When you say all lives matter, who could disagree with that? When you speak about violence, being against violence on all levels, who could disagree with that? So it's not a confrontational stance that's divisive in any way that forces you to take sides. And on far too many occasions, when we see marquee athletes reluctant and hesitant to do just that, to force individuals to take a side, then they come across as too PC and we're ultimately able to summarily dismiss them. I would say LeBron James is the exception, that he is the one guy that you have to give that pass to and not judge him the way that we would judge other athletes. Because when we look at LeBron James today, look at what he's doing with the University of Akron, pledging through the LJ Family Foundation to send 1,000 kids to college. Think about the activism that he partakes in his community, his charitable donations and beyond. This is an individual, LeBron James, that has acted, that has spoken out, particularly with the Donald Sterling fiasco, that has put his name, his money, his character, his reputation where his mouth is. He's done all of that. And when you consider that, then you step back and listen to him yesterday. And while you would have been inclined to say, damn, I wish he would have said this or I wish he would have said that, to sort of illuminate what the real problem is, he is a guy, a walking embodiment as a professional athlete of someone who has been willing to stand front and center and say, I recognize this problem and I'm willing to put myself out here to contribute to fixing it. And when you do that, particularly when you are an athlete in his position, it's nothing short of commendable. It just reminds me of what an incredible role model he is. And I have to give kudos to him and thank him for doing that.
First, I agree with you about LeBron. He is like, there are athletes in recent American life who, a friend of mine made this comment about A-Rod a couple of years ago. A-Rod is so uncomfortable in his own skin that when he talks, he makes you uncomfortable in yours. You just get the sense that there's not authenticity there, and that plagued him throughout his career. Cam Newton gave off a little bit of that vibe when he's made recent comments that seemed empty, seemed like brand management and spin. And also, I feel, you know, when you say, who can argue with all lives matter, I think it's important to always bring up the idea of Black Lives Matter is implicit in that is two. Black Lives Matter two.
Right.
If all lives mattered, there wouldn't need to be a Black Lives Matter. Okay. The thing about, I want to get to the NBA and what LeBron said about the NBA specifically, because I agree with you. LeBron is comfortable and so seems authentic, and I have no problem with what he said. He commended Kaepernick. He said he's going to choose to stand for the anthem. That's something that he does. That's all good. Here's the thing. You started out by saying you don't think it's going to have, you think that LeBron has an influence on other players, so it will influence other players. I think you're probably right. However, it only takes one. It only takes a single player to stand up, and what we saw with Kaepernick is that guy doesn't have to be an elite player. He has to have some kind of recognition among fans, but doesn't have to be an elite player. It, after all, was not Cam Newton or Russell Wilson who took that stand, or rather seat and then knee. It was Colin Kaepernick, who was at this point a once-upon-a-time good player and maybe some point in the future. The NBA has a little issue here, because since it only takes one, and there are a lot of independent thinkers in the NBA, probably at least the sense is they're allowed to be more independent than in football by the powers that be. I think you're going to have a problem. The NBA, once upon a time, David Stern, the then commissioner, was dealing with what he saw as a perception problem. The league was perceived as a quote-unquote black league because it predominantly African-American players. And how does that sell to middle America and to white America, really? Well, decades ago, the idea was that we have to be so buttoned up as a league, so professional as a league, that no one can second-guess our professionalism, and white America can't write us off as a quote-unquote black or urban league somehow. Strictly kind of ghettoize the NBA in that way. And so there was a dress code. So standing for the anthem is compulsory, unlike in the NFL, where even though also a lot of African-American players, the glamour positions, the coach, the quarterback, was all white. And so the NBA finds itself now kind of backed into a corner of its own making, because there's been a sea change in terms of social progress along these lines. And now the kind of dominant sense in this country is not so much that, hey, you better make sure they stand for the national anthem, although there's a huge population that believes that. There's also a huge population that believes, wait a minute, why can't these guys express themselves? And the NBA, I think, now is desperate not to be in a position where a player sits down and they're forced by their own rules to fine them or suspend them.
Here's where I would disagree with you on several fronts. I understand where you're coming from, but you brought up the dress code. The dress code was in the aftermath of Ron Artest running into the
Malice
fans.
at the Palace.
You know, Malice at the Palace, Palace at Auburn Hills. You have to understand that you have a relatively black product that you're selling to the masses, and what David Stern inherited in 1982, hooliganism, drug use, a whole bunch of stuff that was going on. The NBA was on, the players were on tape delay, for crying out loud. When Ron Artest ran into the stands and you had this issue with a black player and black players, and you seeing white fans getting hit and stuff like that. It was just a bad him, Jermaine O'Neal, Steven Jackson. All
threw something at Artest, but yes.
That's right. They did throw something at Ron Artest. But remember, the kid that Ron Artest grabbed wasn't the one that threw the cup of water on him. You see what I'm saying? And not only that, you're 6'6". 250 plus, and a little kid. It was a bad look.
I'm not defending Meta.
I'm just talking about the visual. Yeah. It was that.
Who, by the way, is a great guy.
Was a great guy.
Very badly that night.
That's right. Well, he's a great guy. I get it. Just a bad night. Plus, had issues about bipolar and all of that stuff.
Yes.
So, I'm just saying to you, the NBA, however, in this day and age, is a successful, globalized brand.
Yep.
And because of it, those things aren't necessarily applicable. If there were no Colin Kaepernick, you would have an issue. But if a LeBron and a CP3 and a Melo and a Russell Westbrook and a Kevin Durant and a Steph Curry and a Klay Thompson and those guys don't do that, but some no-name dude playing for the Atlanta Hawks or somebody decides to do it, it's not going to be that big of a deal because Kaepernick already did it. Had there never been anybody, that would be different. But just because one guy...
What is the NBA's reaction
Well, let me tell you what the action is. You know what their reaction is going to be? Nothing. And you want me to tell you why it's going to be nothing? Because the Indiana Fever of the WNBA essentially did it and no penalty was invoked. So if you didn't do anything to them, you're not going to do anything to the NBA players.
Here's the problem. Even when Rauf didn't stand for the national anthem, right, which was the late 90s.
That's right. Early 90s, actually. But go ahead.
I thought it was 96 or 97. But at any rate, even when he did that, the league wanted it handled discreetly. They didn't want to make a big deal out of it.
They called him. They told him, I'm telling you what I know, they told him, stay in the locker room and just don't come out, rather than come out and make that kind of statement, because we can't allow that.
Here's the problem.
That was a different time.
Right, here's the problem. There's a different time, there's a rule on the books, and if they are publicly seen in a very high-profile way of taking the rule off the books, then it's like, whoa, wait a minute, are you somehow anti-national anthem?
Right.
And they're not going to be able to handle a protest discreetly because there's so much attention on the issue.
Right.
So someone is not going to stand for the national anthem. It will become a story, and the NBA is going to be in a corner. Either we change our own rules, or we have to fine or suspend them.
It was 96.
My only thing that I'm saying, it was 96. The only thing that I'm saying to you is this. If it were a marquee player, you have a different problem. If it's a no-name that takes that position, even though it's still the same problem, theoretically, because the NBA would have to make a decision to do something or not do something, it's going to resonate far more exponentially if a marquee name does it.
30 teams, at least one or two marquee or at least well-known players per team. You're talking about 60 dudes. Yes, someone's going to do it.
I'm just telling you, the NBA can get away with doing nothing because the NFL doesn't have that rule on the books, and people are disagreeing with the player as opposed to the league. And therefore, the league is only going to get into some trouble if the league tries to ingratiate itself into the position of manipulating or dictating an individual act. That's what's going to happen.
So are they going to ignore their own rules, not fine or suspend?
Yes.
And that becomes a story.
It'll be interesting to see how they respond. But to your earlier
That's what
point,
I believe. I don't know that.
It's going to be, something's going to happen. I mean, we're getting it pretty soon.
We respect LeBron's stance because the guy that talks the talk and walks the walk. Stephen A. highlighted how active he is in the community.